I never thought I'd see the day when my own neighbor would call the cops on me for drugs that weren't even mine. One second I was sipping coffee on my porch, the next half the neighborhood was gawking as officers dug through my garage. And there she was, HOA Karen, smirking like she'd just won the lottery. She had planted those bags herself, certain I'd be hauled away in handcuffs. What Karen didn't know, and what made the whole scene deliciously ironic, was that I wasn't just her neighbor. I wasn't just another homeowner she could bully with fines and petty complaints. I was the newly elected mayor of this town, and she had just declared war on the one man with the power to crush her entire empire. Before I tell you how it all went down, drop a comment below with your city and time zone. When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, I thought I had finally found peace. After years of living in cramped city apartments, the manicured lawns, tree-lined sidewalks, and postcard-perfect houses seemed like paradise. My wife loved the idea of morning jogs without dodging traffic, and I pictured myself grilling steaks in the backyard while the kids played catch. It was supposed to be a dream come true. That dream lasted all of 3 days until I met Karen. You see, every neighborhood has that one person. The busybody who polices how tall your grass is, whether your curtains match the HOA aesthetic, and how long your car sits in the driveway. Willow Creek had its queen, and her name was Karen Whitmore. Blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a weapon. She was the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia. Our first encounter was laughable. I was still unloading boxes from the moving truck when she marched up the driveway without so much as a hello. "You can't leave those boxes out overnight," she barked. "It lowers property values." I remember pausing mid-lift, staring at her as though she'd just told me gravity was optional. "Ma'am, I'm moving in. They'll be gone by tonight." She narrowed her eyes. "We'll see." That was my welcome to Willow Creek Estates. At first I brushed her off. A few complaints here and there couldn't ruin the sanctuary I'd built for my family, but Karen wasn't the type to get bored easily. She escalated quickly, as if our street were a battlefield, and I'd wandered in as her sworn enemy. 1 week later, I got my first HOA violation slip, mailbox not painted in authorized shade. Apparently, Willow Creek mandated that all mailboxes be eggshell white. Mine was ivory. The difference was microscopic, but according to Karen, it was the equivalent of painting a swastika on the curb. Then came the grass complaint. "Your lawn exceeds the approved height of 2.5 inches. Never mind the fact that we had just rolled out new sod, and the grass hadn't even rooted properly yet. And trash day, God forbid I set the bins out at 6 p.m. instead of the regulation 7 p.m. sharp. Within minutes, I had another slip taped to my door. I started noticing the pattern. Karen wasn't just picky, she was deliberate. While other neighbors occasionally got warnings, I was singled out. She'd park her SUV diagonally across from my house, clipboard in hand, pretending to walk her dog while she snapped photos. She whispered with her circle of HOA board members, a gang of retirees, and disinterested spouses who nodded along like her loyal subjects. One evening, I overheard her outside my fence. She was gossiping with 2 other board members, her voice carrying in the still air. "He thinks he can just move in and do whatever he wants," she hissed. "Not on my watch. I'll make sure he follows the rules or he'll regret it." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about grass or mailboxes. It was personal. Karen had decided I was her project, her enemy, her latest victim. I wasn't the type to lose my cool. I've spent years in politics, sitting through screaming town halls and facing reporters who'd rather crucify me than quote me. Karen's antics were amateur compared to the sharks I'd dealt with downtown, so instead of fighting back, I played it cool. I kept mowing the lawn, painting the fence, rolling the trash bins at the exact second the rules demanded. But I also kept mental notes. Every smirk, every whisper, every petty violation. I knew people like Karen eventually slipped up, and when they did, I'd be ready. Meanwhile, my wife urged me to ignore it. "Don't sink to her level," she'd say. "She just wants attention." Easy advice to give, harder to follow. Every time I saw Karen's smug grin as she dropped another violation notice into my mailbox, I imagined how satisfying it would be to tear that clipboard out of her hands and snap it in half. Still, I resisted. Weeks turned into months. Most neighbors either tolerated Karen or feared her. I noticed how they avoided confrontation, quietly repainting their shutters or paying ridiculous fines just to keep her quiet. She thrived on that fear, strutting around like the empress of the cul-de-sac. But behind her confidence, I sensed something else: frustration. My calm demeanor drove her crazy. She wanted me angry, wanted me to lash out so she could label me the problem neighbor. Instead, I smiled politely and carried on with my day. That only fueled her obsession. Soon, Karen wasn't content with citations and fines. She began a whisper campaign. At community barbecues, I'd notice neighbors giving me sideways glances. Conversations would stop when I approached. Someone even left an anonymous letter in my mailbox, warning me to play by the rules before it's too late. Karen was behind it all, I could feel it. She was laying the groundwork, painting me as a menace to the neighborhood, the villain in her suburban fairy tale. I wasn't sure how far she would go. But then again, I didn't think she was stupid enough to cross the line into criminal territory. I was wrong. Late one Friday evening, after a particularly tense HOA meeting, where I challenged one of her absurd proposals, I saw her standing near my driveway in the shadows. Clipboard in hand, she scribbled something furiously before scurrying off when she noticed me watching. I didn't know it then, but Karen was setting the stage for her most devious plan yet. She wasn't just going to find me. She wasn't just going to humiliate me. No, Karen was about to frame me for something that could destroy my entire reputation. And that's when our quiet neighborhood war turned into something much darker. If Karen had left it at fines and gossip, maybe she would have stayed just another HOA nuisance. But Karen wasn't satisfied with winning small battles. She wanted total victory, and she wanted me gone. I started to sense it one morning when I walked out to grab the paper. Two of Karen's closest allies, Marge and Phil, the husband and wife duo who sat on the HOA board, were whispering at the end of the cul-de-sac. When they saw me, they snapped upright and gave me that too-wide smile people wear when they're guilty of something. Phil quickly stuffed a manila envelope under his arm, and Marge muttered "good morning" before scurrying off. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then came the odd looks. Neighbors crossing the street instead of waving hello. Kids who used to kick soccer balls in my yard, suddenly being called inside the moment I walked out. Even the mailman seemed cagey, avoiding eye contact when he handed me letters. Something was brewing. I learned the full scope of it on a humid Thursday evening. My wife had gone to bed early, and I was in the garage sorting tools when I heard Karen's voice floating over from her patio next door. She wasn't exactly whispering. Karen never whispered, but she was speaking in that conspiratorial tone she reserved for scheming. "Trust me, this will finish him," she said. I froze, wrench in hand. Marge's voice responded. "Karen, are you sure? That's risky." Karen gave a sharp laugh. "Risky, please. He's arrogant, thinks he's untouchable. Once the cops find it in his garage, it's over. Everyone will know what kind of man he really island." My pulse hammered in my ears. Find what I crouched by the garage window, peering through the blinds. I couldn't see them, but I heard every word. Karen went on, "I'll place it myself. Tomorrow night, he'll wake up to sirens." Marge gasped. "And if he fights back," Karen sneered, "then he resists arrest. All the better. People will finally see him for the fraud he island." I gripped the wrench so tight my knuckles went white. She wasn't just talking about violations anymore. She was plotting to frame me. That night I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities. Drugs, I realized. She meant drugs. The suburban queen bee was about to plant narcotics in my garage like some bad episode of a crime show. And the worst part, with her influence in the neighborhood, people would believe it. The next morning, Karen acted as though nothing was amiss. She strutted down the street in her sun hat, waving at passers-by, clipboard tucked neatly under her arm. But when her eyes met mine, I caught the glint of something more: satisfaction, anticipation. I needed proof. But if I confronted her, she'd only deny it and accelerate her plan, so I decided to wait. That Friday evening, I deliberately left the garage door unlocked. I positioned a small camera, one of those motion-detecting wildlife cameras I'd used while hiking on the workbench, aimed at the corner near the shelves. If Karen wanted to sneak into my garage, I'd let her walk right into a trap. Around midnight, the faint click of the door handle stirred me awake. I slipped from bed, careful not to wake my wife, and crept to the garage entrance. Through the crack of the door, I saw a silhouette: Karen. Her blonde bob glowed under the faint streetlight streaming through the window. She was hunched, clutching something shiny in her hand: plastic baggies. She crouched near the shelf, tugged open a toolbox, and stuffed the bags inside. I caught the flash of white powder before she slammed the lid shut. She wiped her hands on her skirt, glanced around nervously, and slipped back out the door like a burglar. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to storm out and catch her red-handed. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed her to think she'd gotten away with it. The next morning I checked the wildlife cam. The footage was perfect. Karen's face illuminated by the glow of her phone flashlight, clear as day. The baggies in her hand unmistakable. My hands trembled as I replayed it over and over, but before I could decide how to use it, things escalated. By noon, squad cars rolled into the neighborhood, sirens off but lights flashing. Neighbors poured onto their lawns, phones out, whispering excitedly. I stepped outside to see Karen at the edge of her driveway, feigning shock. "There, over there," she cried, pointing at me. Two officers approached, stern-faced. "Sir, we have a tip that illegal substances may be in your possession. We need to search your garage." Behind them, Karen folded her arms smugly, trying and failing to hide her smile. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "Of course, officers," I said. "Go right ahead." Neighbors gasped as the officers rifled through shelves and drawers. And sure enough, within minutes, one of them lifted the very toolbox Karen had stuffed the night before. "Bag of powder here," the officer announced. Karen clapped a hand to her mouth in mock horror. "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this." All this time he was hiding it in plain sight. The crowd murmured, phones held high, recording every second. It was the moment Karen had been waiting for. She thought she had me cornered, humiliated, ruined. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the mayor, and Karen had just committed the biggest mistake of her life. The moment the officer held up that toolbox, you could feel the collective gasp ripple through the neighborhood. Phones shot higher into the air, recording my supposed downfall for Facebook gossip groups and HOA newsletters. Karen, queen of the cul-de-sac, stood at the center like a ringmaster at a circus. "Unbelievable," she said loud enough for everyone to hear her voice quivering with fake sorrow. "All this time we thought he was a family man. Theatrics. Pure theatrics." The officer holding the bag of powder turned to me. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us for questioning." His hand hovered near his cuffs. I took a deep breath, careful not to let my smirk show. "Of course, officer," I said evenly. I wouldn't want to interfere with justice. Karen's eyes glittered with triumph. To the crowd it looked like I was caught red-handed. To her it must have felt like the final nail in my coffin. She had orchestrated every step, and now she was savoring the applause in her own mind. But here's the thing about people who hunger for control: they get sloppy. As the officers began to lead me away, I caught sight of Karen whispering frantically to Marge and Phil. She thought she was being discreet, but my ears were trained from years of political backrooms. I caught snippets. It worked. Cameras. Tell everyone. Finally rid of him. If only she knew the only camera that mattered was the one I'd hidden in my garage. Still, I played along. My wrists were cuffed, though. The officer was surprisingly gentle, and I was guided into the back of the squad car. The neighborhood children stared wide-eyed, some terrified, others gleeful at the drama. One teenager muttered, "Dude, the mayor's dad's busted and earned a sharp smack from his mom." Karen strutted to the window of the squad car, leaning in just enough for me to hear. Her sunglasses reflected the flashing lights as she whispered, "Guess you're not so high and mighty now, huh?" I tilted my head, let a slow smile creep across my face, and replied softly, "Careful what you wish for, Karen." For the first time, she blinked, just once. A flicker of unease crossed her face before she straightened and waved at the gathering crowd like some suburban celebrity. The ride to the station was quiet. The officer in the front adjusted his mirror to glance back at me. "Sir," he said carefully, "you don't seem too worried." I shrugged. Should I be? He didn't answer, but I noticed how his grip tightened on the steering wheel. Maybe he already suspected something wasn't adding up. At the station, the motions were routine booking room property inventory, the sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with stale coffee. They set the toolbox on the evidence table, tagging the baggies Karen had planted. As the process unfolded, I remained calm. Years of political training had taught me how to smile when reporters hurled accusations, how to remain steady when opponents lied through their teeth. Compared to City Hall, this was child's play. Still, the officers had to follow procedure. "You're being held on suspicion of possession with intent," one of them read, though even he looked doubtful. I leaned back in the chair, hands folded. "Gentlemen, I understand you're doing your job. But before you go any further, I suggest you check the time-stamped footage on this device." I reached into my jacket pocket carefully, slowly, so no one would panic, and pulled out a USB stick. The wildlife cam's memory card had already been copied earlier that morning. They hesitated. One officer frowned. "Footage, yes," I said smoothly, "of a trespasser entering my garage at precisely 1:14 p.m. last night. A trespasser carrying those very same baggies." The room went still. Another officer cleared his throat. "Who's on the footage?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "The head of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, Karen Whitmore." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I saw their faces shift, the disbelief, the sudden recalculating. Karen had called in the tip herself. She had staged the outrage, and now if they followed the evidence, she was about to hang herself. One officer excused himself to check the footage. The others sat uncomfortably, as though realizing they'd just cuffed the wrong man. Meanwhile, I waited calm as ever. In politics, silence can be louder than shouting. Let them sweat. Minutes later, the officer returned face pale. He nodded at his partner, who immediately uncuffed me. "Mister," he began, then trailed off. I finished for him. Mayor Thomas Blackwell. The silence that followed was delicious. Yes, I had run for office, quietly keeping it under wraps, even from my neighbors. The campaign had been swift supported by those tired of corrupt HOA influence creeping into city zoning boards and council seats. I'd won by a comfortable margin just weeks before moving into Willow Creek. And now the queen of HOA fines had tried to frame the mayor with drugs. When I stood, the officers practically stumbled over themselves to apologize. I waved them off. "Don't apologize to me," I said. "Do your job. Follow the evidence." By the time I left, the station word had already spread. Karen's smirk was gone, replaced by wide-eyed panic as officers pulled into her driveway instead. Neighbors who had once avoided me were now whispering about her. The empire she built on fear was starting to crumble, and she didn't even know the half of it, because I wasn't done yet. The next morning, Willow Creek Estates was buzzing like a hornet's nest. The HOA Facebook group lit up with speculation, half the neighborhood whispering about the arrest, and the other half questioning how Karen could have been seen near my garage. Videos from last night, me being led in handcuffs, Karen smirking, were already circulating with dramatic captions like "shocking scandal in Willow Creek." Karen had always thrived on attention, but now it was backfiring. Her face was everywhere, and the whispers weren't flattering. Still, she wasn't ready to give up her crown. By mid-afternoon, she stormed down the street, clipboard clutched like a shield, calling for an emergency HOA meeting on the clubhouse lawn. Neighbors gathered, some eager, others hesitant. I kept my distance at first, watching from my porch with my coffee in hand. Karen cleared her throat, projecting her voice as though she were addressing a courtroom. "Residents of Willow Creek, I called this meeting because our community is under threat. A certain individual," she glanced pointedly in my direction, "has brought shame and danger to our neighborhood. We must act swiftly to protect our values." Theatrics again. I walked slowly toward the crowd, letting the tension build. Conversations hushed, heads turned. Karen's confidence faltered for half a second, but she recovered. "Mr. Blackwell," she said loudly. "You are in violation of Karen." I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "It's Mayor Blackwell." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Excuse me," I stepped onto the grass, folding my hands behind my back like I'd done at countless press conferences. I was sworn in as mayor of this city 3 weeks ago, and while I had hoped to enjoy some peace and quiet here, it seems fate had other plans. The silence was delicious. Neighbors gawked. A few muttered to each other in shock. One man whispered, "He's the mayor," loud enough for half the cul-de-sac to hear. Karen's jaw tightened. "That doesn't change the fact." "Oh, it changes everything," I said, my tone still calm, almost amused. "Because now we're not talking about petty citations or mailbox colors. We're talking about criminal activity," gasps echoed. Karen tried to laugh it off. "What nonsense are you?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The wildlife cam footage played loud and clear, Karen sneaking into my garage, baggies in hand, her face unmistakable. The crowd collectively inhaled. One woman clutched her chest. A teenager muttered, "Holy crap," under his breath. Karen's voice cracked. That could be anyone. Grainy footage means nothing, except I continued smoothly. "It's time-stamped. It matches the exact moment the drugs appeared in my garage, and your fingerprints, Karen, are all over those baggies." Forensics confirmed it this morning. Her face drained of color. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some glared at Karen, others shook their heads in disbelief. Marge and Phil stepped back as though physically distancing themselves from her toxicity. Karen sputtered. "This is a setup. He's framing me." I raised an eyebrow. "The mayor of this city planted evidence on himself, invited the police to search his garage, and then conveniently caught you on camera. That's your defense." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I let the silence linger. Then deliberately I turned to the crowd. "I moved here for peace. I wanted to be just another neighbor, grilling burgers and mowing my lawn like the rest of you. But Karen couldn't allow that. She decided to wage war. And in doing so, she exposed herself not just as a tyrant with a clipboard, but as a criminal willing to destroy lives for power." The neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were glaring at her. One man crossed his arms and said, "I paid 3 fines last month because of her nonsense." A woman chimed in. "She told me my kids' bikes lowered property values." Karen's empire was crumbling in real time. But I wasn't done. As mayor, I continued, I take corruption seriously. And make no mistake, this isn't just an HOA squabble anymore. Planting evidence, filing false police reports, attempting to frame a citizen, those are crimes. Serious ones. Karen's hands shook. She tried to rally, shouting, "You can't do this. I run this neighborhood." I locked eyes with her, letting a small smile tug at my lips. Not anymore. Right on cue, a pair of squad cars rolled up. The same officers who had cuffed me the night before stepped out grim-faced. The crowd parted as they approached. Karen Whitmore, one officer, announced, "You're under arrest for evidence tampering, filing a false report, and attempted entrapment." The collective gasp from the neighbors was almost cinematic. Karen shrieked, stumbling backward. "No, this is my community, you can't take me away," but the cuffs clicked around her wrists all the same. As she was led to the squad car, neighbors muttered their grievances. Some recorded gleefully, already imagining the headlines. Others simply sighed in relief as though a storm cloud had finally lifted. I stood tall watching as Karen's reign ended not with applause but with humiliation. And in that moment I realized the true twist of power wasn't that I was the mayor. It was that Karen, for all her scheming, had never understood real power. She thought it came from control, from fear, from bullying. But real power comes from truth, from patience, from knowing when to let your enemies dig their own graves. And Karen had dug hers 6 feet deep. When the squad cars pulled away with Karen in the back seat, you could almost feel the collective exhale from the neighborhood. For the first time since I'd moved in, people lingered outside their homes, not in fear of Karen's clipboard, but in relief that her grip had finally been broken. Children ran freely on the sidewalks, neighbors whispered in clusters, and I caught more than one person glancing at me with gratitude instead of suspicion. But the real unraveling had only just begun. The police investigation kicked into high gear. The footage from my wildlife cam combined with the forensic evidence painted a damning picture. Karen's fingerprints weren't just on the baggies, they were on the toolbox itself. Her car's GPS showed it parked near my driveway at the exact time she broke in. And as if fate wanted to rub salt in her wounds, one neighbor's Ring doorbell camera had captured her sneaking around in the dark clipboard under her arm like some deranged hall monitor. Within days, the narrative had flipped completely. Local news stations picked up the story, HOA president arrested in drug planting scandal. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same woman who once boasted about upholding community values was now the poster child for corruption and deceit. And the HOA board, they scrambled like rats on a sinking ship. At the next scheduled HOA meeting, the clubhouse was packed wall to wall. Normally those meetings were a dreary affair, half-empty chairs, people staring at their phones while Karen lectured about shrub height. But this time everyone showed up hungry for answers. I sat quietly in the back, arms folded, watching, as Marge tried to call the meeting to order. Her voice trembled. Good evening, everyone. As you all know, Karen is indisposed at the moment. And indisposed, someone shouted from the crowd. She's in jail. The room erupted in laughter and boos. Phil cleared his throat, stepping in for his wife. We want to assure everyone that the HOA will continue to function as normal. Normal, another neighbor snapped. You mean corrupt, biased, harassing us over mailbox paint while Karen was sneaking around planting drugs? The board looked like deer in headlights. I decided it was time to step in. I rose from my seat and walked to the front, the crowd parting almost instinctively. When I reached the podium, the room quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, I began my voice carrying the calm authority honed from years of politics. I think we can all agree that what's happened here is more than just embarrassing. It's a wake-up call. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. For too long, Karen wielded her position like a weapon. She turned neighbors against each other, fined people for trivial nonsense, and created an atmosphere of fear in what should have been a community of trust. But what she did to me, what she tried to do, goes beyond petty power plays. It was criminal. And it exposed something much deeper. I paused, letting the silence settle. The problem isn't just Karen. It's the system that allowed her to operate unchecked. An HOA board with no accountability is a breeding ground for abuse. And as mayor, I won't stand by and let that continue, not here, not anywhere in this city. The applause was immediate. Some clapped hesitantly, others thunderously. But the message was clear. People were ready for change. From that day forward, I launched what I called the HOA Accountability Initiative. We pushed through city ordinances requiring HOA boards to operate with transparency, limiting their ability to issue arbitrary fines, and subjecting them to oversight when abuse was suspected. No longer could one self-appointed tyrant terrorize an entire neighborhood with a clipboard and a power trip. And oh, how the board squirmed. Marge resigned within a week. Phil followed, claiming health reasons. The other members, suddenly without their queen bee, scattered like leaves in the wind. By the end of the month, Willow Creek's HOA board had collapsed entirely. In its place, residents voted to form a community council, voluntary, transparent, and advisory, rather than punitive. For the first time in years, people smiled at each other during walks. Block parties returned. Kids' bikes cluttered the sidewalks without fear of citations. It was as though a great weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders, and Karen, her downfall was far from over. The district attorney filed formal charges, evidence tampering, filing false police reports, trespassing, and attempted entrapment. Her smug smirk vanished from the neighborhood, replaced by grainy mugshots plastered on the evening news. Her so-called friends distanced themselves, claiming they had no idea what she was up to. The same neighbors who once trembled at her knock now joked about her orange jumpsuit. One day, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Just a single line: "Thank you for standing up to her. We were too afraid." I held that letter for a long time. It reminded me why I'd run for mayor in the first place, not for power, not for titles, but to protect ordinary people from bullies who thought they could control others through fear. But make no mistake, Karen wasn't finished thrashing. Even behind bars, she tried to spin her story, claiming she was the victim of a political setup. She wrote letters to the local paper, called into talk shows from jail, and even filed a motion to regain her HOA presidency pending appeal. The judge laughed her out of the courtroom. The backfire was complete. Karen's empire, once built on fines and intimidation, had collapsed into rubble. The very neighbors she lorded over now mocked her openly. The system she weaponized was dismantled under the weight of her crimes. And the irony was perfect. She had spent years trying to make others feel small, powerless, trapped. But in the end, she trapped herself, caught by her own arrogance, her own schemes, her own need to win at all costs. For me, it was more than vindication. It was confirmation that sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting or stooping to their level. Sometimes the best revenge is patience. Let them build their house of lies. Then watch as it collapses under its own rotten foundation. And for Karen, it had collapsed spectacularly. The day of Karen's sentencing felt almost surreal. The courthouse was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a few former HOA board members who'd once cowered under her thumb. They all came to watch the Queen of Fines face her reckoning. I arrived quietly, taking a seat near the back. I didn't need the spotlight. The story was already bigger than me. Local news vans lined the courthouse, steps, their cameras aimed squarely at the woman who had once controlled mailbox paint and lawn heights, as though she were Caesar herself. When they brought her in, shackled at the wrists, Karen still tried to play the role. Chin, high lips, pursed eyes darting for sympathy. She wore a pressed blazer over her orange jumpsuit, as if the right outfit might erase the charges against her. The judge wasted no time. He listed the counts: evidence tampering, filing false police reports, trespassing, attempted entrapment. With each charge, Karen's face twitched, though she kept forcing that same brittle smile. Her lawyer tried one last desperate spin. "Your Honor, my client is a respected community leader. She has served tirelessly to uphold neighborhood values. This entire case is a misunderstanding, an overreaction blown out of proportion by local politics." The judge raised an eyebrow. Respectfully, counselor planting drugs in a neighbor's garage and calling the police is not a misunderstanding. It is a crime. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Karen shot to her feet, ignoring her lawyer's frantic tug at her sleeve. "I was protecting my community," she shouted. "He's dangerous. He's manipulating all of you. You're all blind." The judge's gavel slammed. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore, or you'll be held in contempt." For the first time, Karen's mask cracked. She sat heavily, eyes wide, lips trembling. When the sentence was read, 18 months in county jail with probation to follow, the room seemed to collectively exhale. Some neighbors clapped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. One man whispered, "Finally," like he'd been holding it in for years. Karen was let out screaming. "This isn't over, I'll be back. You'll regret this." Her voice echoed through the marble halls, but nobody believed her anymore. The Queen was dethroned. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. They didn't chase Karen, she was gone. They chased me. Mayor Blackwell. Did you know she was planning this? How will this affect HOA oversight citywide? Do you feel vindicated? I paused on the courthouse steps, letting the questions wash over me. Then I answered simply, this was never about me. This was about truth. And the truth is stronger than any clipboard, any HOA fine, or any lie. Justice has been served. The soundbite hit the evening news, and by nightfall my face was on every channel. But more importantly, so was Karen's downfall. Back in Willow Creek, the transformation was staggering. Neighbors who had once lived in fear now organized barbecues, potlucks, even a block-wide garage sale that Karen would have fined into oblivion. Kids' chalk drawings colored the sidewalks again. Music floated from porches. The air felt lighter, freer. And people talked to me not as their mayor, but as their neighbor. "Thank you," one elderly man said, shaking my hand. "I thought I'd have to sell my house just to get away from her." "My kids can finally ride their bikes without her harassing us," another parent told me. Even the mailman grinned. "Best delivery route in town now, thanks to you." But it wasn't thanks to me. Not really. It was thanks to Karen's own arrogance. She couldn't help herself. She had to win, had to control, had to destroy anyone who dared to live outside her lines. And in the end, she destroyed herself. I did attend one last meeting in the clubhouse, though not as a defendant or a target this time, as a guest speaker. The new community council had invited me to talk about reforms and to reassure residents that the HOA era was over. As I stood at the podium, I looked around the room. The fear was gone. People laughed freely, spoke openly, challenged each other without worry of fines or retaliation. It felt like democracy, not dictatorship. I cleared my throat. We all saw what unchecked power can do. We all lived under it. And now we've seen what happens when truth comes out. Karen tried to make an example out of me. But instead, she became the example of why no one person should ever control an entire community. The applause was genuine. Not the nervous clapping of people afraid of being singled out, but the kind that comes from shared relief, shared victory. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I thought back to the first day I moved in the boxes on the driveway, Karen barking about property values. It felt like a lifetime ago. And in a way, it was. She had tried to bury me. Instead, she buried herself. The HOA board was gone, the neighbors were free, and Karen Whitmore, the once feared queen of fines, was just another name on the county jail roster. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come fast. But when it does, it comes hard. And it leaves no clipboard standing. Life in Willow Creek Estates changed overnight. Without Karen's constant shadow looming over us, the neighborhood felt reborn. Lawns grew a little wilder, but nobody minded. Kids left basketball hoops by the curb chalk murals sprawled across driveways, and for once the sound of laughter was louder than the sound of Karen's heels clicking down the sidewalk. I noticed the little things first. My wife hummed while gardening, unbothered by the possibility of a violation slip taped to our door. The Hendersons across the street finally painted their shutters, teal, a color Karen had once declared offensive to the aesthetic. Even the Johnsons, who used to wheel their trash cans out at precisely 7:01 p.m., in fear, started putting them out whenever they pleased. It wasn't chaos, it was freedom. Neighbors began gathering again, something that hadn't happened in years. We held a block party in late spring, and people brought dishes from every culture in town. There were barbecue ribs, homemade tamales, Greek spanakopita, Vietnamese spring rolls, all laid out on folding tables under string lights. Someone brought a guitar, and before long the entire street was singing together. I looked around that night and realized this was what community was supposed to feel like. Karen's old allies tried to keep their distance. Marge and Phil moved out quietly, their for sale sign appearing almost overnight. Others who once sided with her kept their heads down, suddenly friendly, as though the last few years had been a bad dream they wanted to forget. Nobody missed them. As mayor, I had my hands full with city business, but Willow Creek became my favorite example of why accountability mattered. I often used our story in speeches not to embarrass Karen, though let's be honest, she embarrassed herself plenty, but to show how unchecked authority can corrupt even the smallest of offices. Give a petty tyrant a clipboard, and they'll believe they're a monarch. The reforms we pushed through changed the landscape citywide. HOAs were no longer allowed to fine residents without an appeals process. Board meetings had to be open to all, recorded and posted publicly. And any board caught abusing power could be dissolved under city oversight. Other neighborhoods thanked me. One resident from across town told me, "Our Karen stopped harassing us the moment she heard what happened here." The ripple effect was real. And Karen, she served her time, though she fought it every step of the way. Rumor had it she tried to organize committees inside jail, finding cellmates for messy bunks. They laughed her out of the block. When she finally got out, she didn't return to Willow Creek. Her house sold at a loss, and the last we heard, she moved 2 counties over. But no matter where she went, her name carried baggage. Karen Whitmore wasn't the name of a leader anymore, it was a warning. For me, the victory wasn't about her downfall. It was about the restoration of something much larger: trust. Trust between neighbors. Trust that no one person could dictate how others lived. Trust that even in the most unlikely places, justice could still prevail. One evening months later, I sat on my porch watching the sunset bleed orange and pink across the sky. My wife sat beside me sipping sweet tea, and the kids played tag in the yard. Across the street, the Hendersons waved their teal shutters gleaming proudly in the fading light. "This feels like home now," my wife said softly. And she was right. Karen had tried to destroy me with lies, but in the end she destroyed herself. What she left behind wasn't chaos, it was freedom, unity, and a neighborhood stronger than ever. Looking back, the entire ordeal taught me something I'll never forget. People will try to break you, especially when you don't bend to their control. Some will spread lies, manipulate others, or even plant evidence to ruin you. But truth has a way of surfacing, and integrity is a shield stronger than any smear campaign. It's easy to lash out when you're attacked. Believe me, I wanted nothing more than to rip that clipboard out of Karen's hands and snap it in two. But patience, painful, deliberate patience, was my greatest weapon. By letting her expose herself, I didn't just win against her, I freed an entire community. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with. Never let toxic people dictate your peace. Hold fast. Document everything. Stay calm, even when the storm rages. Because when the dust settles, those who build their power on lies always collapse under their own weight. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a Karen in your life? An HOA bully? A toxic boss? A manipulative neighbor? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of justice and irony, don't forget to subscribe for more HOA drama and revenge stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.